Welcome to the launch party for the Public Life Project. We're so glad that you could join us tonight. I'm John Coleman. I'm the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Minnesota. The Public Life Project has been several years in the making. As we've witnessed the divisiveness and rancor that seems to permeate our public lives, we wanted to create an experience for our students and for the communities we serve that would help us set a new direction. We wanted to help students develop the skills and confidence to move more fully into public life, to listen and engage with a range of viewpoints with humility and empathy, to learn how to participate in robust and productive dialogue, and to see engaging with others across all of our differences as a wonderful and powerful opportunity. And we wanted to amplify the research and knowledge that our faculty bring to the table regarding political polarization, the history of differences and divisions in America, information and misinformation in our digital media environment, and much more. That is how the Public Life Project was born. We're excited to celebrate its official launch with you tonight. And let me tell you a little bit about how the PLP, as we call it, will work. First, this fall, students began enrolling in a series of classes, including freshman seminars and signature courses taught by some of the faculty you'll hear from this evening. These classes will help students learn how to understand and navigate differences, challenge their own perceptions and ideas about the world, learn to listen and develop empathy for the other side, develop skills and knowledge to more fully participate in public life, and encourage a new generation of leaders to get, or in many cases, to stay involved in their communities and engaged in the issues of the day. The second component of the PLP is producing events and experiences for the public, like the one that you're attending tonight. This is the first of many public events that will showcase the expertise of our faculty, along with those of other leading scholars and public leaders from Minnesota and around the country. These events will give us a chance to engage with and learn from each other around the most pressing issues we face. And as I mentioned before, elevating our research core will be a third aspect of the Public Life Project. You'll hear from a few of our faculty experts later in the program. Tonight, we're also celebrating our collaboration with Twin Cities Public Broadcasting, or TPT, as it's known locally, who partnered with us to create a series of videos we'll share with you in just a minute. Like us, TPT seeks to engage these issues and is committed to public dialogue. Together, we're hoping to reach the broadest possible audience to discuss topics and find new and productive ways of understanding each other, both the things we have in common and the points of difference. Before we go ahead and air our first video short, I'd like to thank the donors who made tonight's program and this fall's events possible. Alumni Deb Hopp and Kit Dahl approached me about this project many years ago and helped facilitate and underwrite our TPT films. Thank you, Deb and Kit, for being our PLP muses over these years. Alumnus Don Brownstein provided important advice and a lead gift to help get the Public Life Project up and running. His support is helping to make this fall's event series a reality. Thank you, Don. Our partners at TPT, Sylvia Strobel, Melissa Wright, Pam McClanahan, Elizabeth Allen, and video producer Kate McDonald. Thank you. And Professor of Sociology Doug Hartmann, who will speak in just a moment. Doug stepped up when I asked him to serve as the first faculty director, and he has done an exceptional job. Last but not least, I want to recognize our inaugural Public Life Project graduate research assistants, Jean Marie Mayer, Edgar Campos, and Allison Steinke. They have been true creative partners and have accelerated our progress in the PLP. So again, thank you for joining us. And now I would like to share with you the first of 3 films produced with TPT. This video teases the larger PLP themes we'll explore in tonight's program and as the initiative unfolds in the coming years. Thank you for being with us.
I do think America's divided. We have evidence of increasing partisan polarization in the political arena, and we've seen increase in protests that I think is an indication of people feeling like they don't have voice within the normal democratic process.
America's a very divided country. We have Democrats and Republicans.
Denial or nihilism.
We're a country of diverse people, so we're bound to be divided.
We've been divided from the start.
For it not to be divided would mean that we wouldn't have that pass.
I would caution against being fearful of polarization. It's evidence that we're actually talking.
We grow up around people who are a lot like us, but we also know the world's bigger than that, and I think our students want to encounter that diversity, the range of the human experience, and liberal arts is a place that they can do that.
Growing up, I was raised like evangelical, conservative, Christian.
I do find a lot of community of students who are going through the exact same thing.
I can really share my culture with the people that I'm friends with.
My longtime roommate, we come from very different backgrounds.
Not many people know much about Egyptians or have met an Egyptian other than me.
It's important to know that we have indigenous students here.
I think when I got to the university, I was just very surprised to see people who looked like me.
It's really, really cool to have that experience of meeting someone I otherwise wouldn't have.
Look at the world around you. Embracing a conversation with somebody who's different than you. Gain that extra perspective.
The core of a liberal arts education is learning how to take information and then use that information to make an argument to people who you might disagree with.
I always have kind of been, rightward leaning, I suppose.
Well, I would say I'm a liberal.
It's okay to be, different in my beliefs.
It's not about finding a middle ground. It's about acknowledging your differences and testing your own beliefs. When we disagree, the people that we disagree with have their reasons, and it's incumbent upon us to understand what those reasons are.
That's what true diversity is, to have tolerance. But I think it's a very tricky line between what we tolerate and what we don't tolerate.
We are such an individualist kind of people that I think we're actually pretty tolerant of individuals from a lot of different backgrounds. But when we start thinking in group terms, collections of people who are bigger than us or different from us, that's harder for a lot of Americans to process.
Educating people on the alternatives. And once people know that there are better alternatives, they at least have the option.
We need to learn how to assess our views and our opinions. But I think it's also important to teach students how to assess information. How do we present an argument in a coherent fashion that's clear and understandable to somebody who disagrees with us?
When people feel like they're in a safe space, they also feel like they're able to learn about other people's experiences, about their own experiences.
Know more about my history that I wouldn't have learned about if I had not gone to a school like the University of Minnesota.
I've appreciated the opportunity to learn how my personal identities play into different systems.
I really don't believe we need to have a consensus always.
I would say that university, so far at least, has shown me a lot of experiences I wouldn't have garnered otherwise.
Liberal arts provides a space for us to think imaginatively and creatively past the differences that divide us.
A lot of sort of the political issues that we see today, especially when we're talking about those divides, are really just changes in how we understand and think about and want democracy to progress.
The right policies, hopefully, then just flow naturally from having a better understanding of how the world works.
When we think of each other, we do so much more. And for me, that's what my education here at the University of Minnesota has been about.
Hi, I'm Doug Hartmann, professor of sociology here at the University of Minnesota and director of the Public Life Project. Public life starts here. I'm really proud of the video. I like watching it, except probably for the parts that I'm in, which make me cringe a bit. I don't know, we had the Emmys the other night. I don't know if it's exactly Emmy award-winning stuff, but I think it's a set of videos that really speak to what we're trying to do here with the Public Life Project at the university, in our college, and what we are doing in all of our teaching and research and engagement here on campus. It's my honor to direct the project and to have a little bit of a role here tonight. We're going to discuss the Public Life Starts Here video that you just saw with several of the participants in that. I'll help to moderate that conversation. Then we'll have a second conversation that my colleague Karen Ho from the anthropology department will help to guide after we've seen the second and third vignettes in our series. One of those is on misinformation and information, the other on the challenge of studying religion in a large land-grant institution. After that, we'll invite those of you who are watching on screen at home or wherever you may be to send in some questions, and we'll have a little time at the end for questions and answers with all of the panelists that are here tonight. Before we get to that, I'd like to say just a few more words about the project and building off of what Dean Coleman already told you. It's a multifaceted project that grew out of the interests, concerns, and questions of community leaders, stakeholders, and many of our alumni. Probably some of you who are watching this. We thank you for your engagement, for your suggestions, for the support you've already shown us. The project is really to address the polarizing challenges that we see in our communities, in our classrooms, on campus, and to engage those so we can better understand and address the challenges in our midst, and perhaps most importantly, so we can help prepare our students to do that, to go into the world that's divided and polarized and be active citizens and indeed leaders of our communities. It's a multifaceted initiative. We support teacher training and classroom curriculum development. We're trying to support research that goes on in our college on these issues. It can be from our political psychologists or our journalists or folks who work on anti-racism and xenophobia and immigration. We do research that both analyzes these problems and tries to imagine how to move past them. Deliberative democracy, engaging, challenging conversations. We also do public outreach and events. Indeed, we're convinced that we here at the University of Minnesota and the College of Liberal Arts can be a model and provide leadership for all of our communities, in our state, even in our country. This is our first attempt to try to help to model that. But at the core of what we do is instruction and engagement, particularly of our undergraduates. Indeed, when we first started this initiative, building off of some of the work that John Coleman has led us in the college, we called it civic readiness. And it really centered the intent to allow our students to be ready for the civic world that they were going to engage. And we're very much committed to that still. In fact, we're building the whole project in the undergraduate level around the core competencies that guide us in the liberal arts, in particular, active citizenship, community engagement, engaging diversity, and creating oral and written communication and empathy. Our students, we've found, are prepared to engage diversity and the deeply dividedness that many of us fear and are concerned about. One of the things I hope comes through in the video for you is the real energy and excitement and engagement that the students bring that many, maybe from my generation, are kind of scared of. Our students embrace the challenges. They want to be prepared to deal with them and to be leaders in responding to them. They're not scared, cynical, or despondent. They're looking to build experiences here on campus and in our classrooms that play off of that energy and prepare them for the next stage in their lives. We've tried to support that. We also need that. All of us need that. We've tried to capture some of that in these videos to introduce how students, faculty, and staff are thinking about this and the work that we're doing on this behalf. Hopefully that got suggested for you in this first video. And now what I get to do is to invite some of the people who are in that video to talk a little further about their experiences, not just with the video, but with the project and what they do here on campus. And so I'm going to transition over and introduce them here momentarily. So we have three panelists with us. Valerie Tiberius from the philosophy department, Chris Phelan from economics, and Braden Roberts, a recent CLA graduate, and I'd say proud sociology major. So thanks each of you for being here with us. I want to start with a question for each of you to reflect on, and whoever wants to go first can jump in. The question is, what drew you to this project? Why does it matter to you? And what do you think we're trying to accomplish as teachers and students? And as I realize, that's actually three questions, so you can pick which one you want to join or start talking about, but kind of a general one about the project and your role and vision of it.
I have a microphone, maybe I'll go first. I teach ethics, and I very frequently teach ethical theories. And the way some people teach ethical theories, they're like in competition with each other. So we're learning, which is the best theory. But I myself, I like to teach them as tools in a toolbox that we have to engage people who come from different ethical perspectives from the ones that we have. So that to me it's very sympathetic with the goals of the Public Life Project, though I think lately the kind of political divisions that we have are more intense and heated than the different ethical perspectives that are represented by the theories I teach. But I still think the kinds of skills students need to recognize that their own perspective is one perspective, that other people have a perspective, which is often reasoned and interesting, and that they can make progress talking to each other, learning where the other person is coming from. So I think because of what I teach and the nature of philosophy and the nature of my discipline, I was just very sympathetic with the goals of the project.
Thanks so much. Braden, do you want to go next? I'm sorry to sandwich you between two faculty members, by the way. Go ahead.
No worries, no worries. Yes, I would say I believe I was drawn to the Public Life Project because I recognized the value and what it meant to be a learner, not just a student, but understanding that you'll always be learning throughout your entire life. You don't have to be a student, you don't have to be an instructor or a professor or a teacher. We all experience together, and we take away from that at the end of the day. So what the Public Life Project really communicates to me is that there's an opportunity to learn about not just the world around you, but an opportunity to engage with why you may feel the way that you do. It provides the perspective of, okay, there's more than just me. Public life is life amongst others. What does it mean? How is it sustainable? How can I continue to be myself in a world full of other people too? I may disagree, I may disagree, or I may agree, I may disagree, but it is also important to understand the why behind that, because it allows for a more sustainable way to coexist with others.
Professor Phelan.
So my draw to this was data that I saw, and it's not the data that we're more and more divided, because people differ, that's fine. What bothers me is the survey data on the fraction of students, I don't have it for this university, but it's the fraction of students nationwide who feel that they have to censor themselves, that they will be, if they enter into an honest conversation about controversial topics, that they don't want to do that because they believe, right or wrong, that they'll be ostracized or something like that. This is extraordinarily unhealthy. because it's very easy to convince yourself in your own head that your arguments are correct. The crucible by which we test, I don't even know if that's the right term, that we test our own thoughts is getting other people to tell us why we're incorrect or having an argument about them. And I am worried that we are creating a culture that doesn't happen as much as it should. And I would like to be part of creating an environment where that happens more.
Professor Tiberius, I see you shaking your head yes.
Yeah, it sounds like the Socratic method, so I'm very much in favor. You put forth an argument, and this is what I always tell my students. This is how we do philosophy. You put forward your position, you offer your reasons, someone else attacks you, and then you build it up stronger, and that's how you make intellectual progress. So yeah, I really do agree with you, Chris.
Braden, I wonder if you had any experiences in classrooms or on campus that either reflect that or speak to the challenges that we're trying to confront here.
I would say, yeah, there's definitely elements of combative language or combative conversation when it could just essentially be conversation, when we can engage at that more basic level of trying to understand. Fortunately, I was able to gain a minor in my time at the university. I obtained a minor in the leadership department. And one of the things we really like to stress there is seeking to understand. That's one of the first concepts that students learn. And it's trying to reinforce the idea that we are allowed to have conversation. We can make asks of each other. We don't have to be at odds or against each other necessarily. And to Professor Phelan's point, I think that it's very profound that a lot of people feel like this is the case and that the trends are persisting in a way where people are uncomfortable to share, uncomfortable to speak up. And I think the more perspectives we can add to the mix, the better decisions we can make.
I have to jump in because you talked about combative language, and I had just said the word attack, and now I feel terrible about that. But this is always my experience, that the students are more articulate than I am. I suppose, when I said attack, philosophy has a lot of combative metaphors, but what I meant was, reasonable objection to a position that spurs the other person in the dialogue to think about what may be wrong with their own position and improve it.
How about from an economics point of view, Professor Phelan?
I was once counseled to be more diplomatic by an investment banker because I tend to start sentences with no. I'm like, okay, would people on Wall Street think that you're overly aggressive? Maybe you could tone it down. I haven't, but I thought about it.
Before we move on, I'd like to invite you to, especially Professor Phelan and Braden, if you'd reflect on the clips that you saw in the video and things that you were quoted as saying and what you thought about that, and if there was other things you wanted to add to that or wish had been included.
I would say thinking about each other, to my last, I guess, quote attributed in the video, when we think about each other, how much further that takes us, I'm also trying to say that it does not need to be a grandiose idea of we all together, because the concept is as simple as who your neighbor is, who you identify your neighbor to be, who you identify your communities to be, and the communities next to you. I think what I most want to get across is that it's all a choice at the end of the day, and we can choose how we react to certain situations all of the time. That's what's within our control. And I believe, yeah, we ought to exercise that to the best of our ability, to the best of our knowledge. Yeah.
Braden, I think you're making Professor Tiberius jealous that you weren't a philosophy major. I'll just say that. Thank you for representing. Professor Phelan, video commentary.
I guess I am a little worried about the difference between what makes good television and what makes good conversation. So it's always the case that what makes good television is many times the equivalent of Twitter. You'll have one person on for 10 seconds, another person on for 15 seconds. I would like our students to engage in and appreciate more than sound bites. So maybe, we can get longer, more thought out arguments than short things.
You have to remember that Professor Phelan always starts out by saying, no!
Exactly.
So, Professor Tiberius, you weren't in the video. We didn't get to use you, but any thoughts as the critic now of what you've seen, and those of us who are in them? We've got a thick skin, so we can take the philosophy line here.
Well, honestly, my main reaction to watching all three really was to think about how incredibly wonderful my colleagues are and the students in this college, because you did try to get me to be in a video, but I was just so COVID anxious that even though it was perfectly safe and you did everything you could to make it safe, I couldn't quite handle it. So I backed out of being in the videos, and when I watched my colleagues saying the kinds of thoughtful things that they said, and especially the students who they just continue to impress me in the video, but also in my classes right now. They're so keen and thoughtful and interesting. I'm just amazed and happy.
And thanks for joining us here tonight. I think we're about at time, is that right? So we'll wrap up this dialogue, and what we want to do now is show the other two vignettes that we produced as part of this series. The first will be about knowledge and information, In Pursuit of Knowledge and Information is its title, and the second is about religion at a public institution. We'll watch those, and then Professor Ho from the anthropology department will lead a discussion with a new set of panelists who are participants in this process as well. Thanks a lot.
Do you have a cell phone on you?
I do, yeah, I do.
My mom said, how did it go?
I think one of the biggest divides in this country has to do with where people get information from.
What types of news sources do you consume on your phone?
I've been very into Reddit lately.
The Wall Street Journal print edition.
Twitter and Reddit.
How does the media, which is what I study, how does that sort of perpetrate and amplify some of the divides that we see, especially across that political spectrum, where so many issues related to race and identity sort of thrive?
I think social media, either people encourage conversation or discourage it.
It's never really pretty to read those arguments online, whether it be Twitter or Instagram, Facebook. I do think it contributes to just polarization in general.
Have you ever seen anything online that turned out to not be true?
Oh, yeah.
The COVID vaccine, there was a lot of misinformation going around about that.
Can you get microchipped by Bill Gates in the vaccine or some crazy thing?
We need to do a little bit better about filtering what we read and what we don't.
There's lots of different dimensions to misinformation and disinformation and fake news. For the most part, it's news that is meant to mislead.
As I got to college, we start to learn about how framing works and how they can put anything out there and shape it the way they want to.
There's always been rumors and misinformation that circulate. Part of the difference today is that we're just much more aware of it because we have a digital record of just how far that rumor is spread.
Don't trust the first thing you read.
In the age of social media and digitization, we need to be diligent about doing the work ourselves, doing the research ourselves, taking the extra step.
Historians value going back to original texts and original sources, and not necessarily taking those as truth, but understanding the context in which they were created.
I use a lot of the sources I have from my major and minor, and if I don't use things for my classes, I end up looking things online by myself.
If you don't feel strongly that there's a source out there that you can trust for information, it can be really disorienting.
With social media, I'd like to have security in what I'm seeing. So if that means I need to go out and do the research and know for myself to be sure, that's okay. People don't have my standards. That's also okay.
It's important to take every news article with a grain of sand because it's very easy to skew things.
I'm more concerned, actually, when it comes to the students with what comes along with the kind of generalized skepticism about everything they see. If that's the attitude you take, it becomes really hard to convince people to trust reliable information and sources of information that are actually doing a really decent job of trying to pin down what is the truth of what actually happened.
There really is an art of reading the newspaper and understanding that we have to separate opinions from facts, and that's the job of the reader.
You know, what gives me the most hope is really talking to my students and the way that I see that they're both curious about these kinds of topics and interested and really open to hearing different perspectives than the ones that they maybe are surrounded with every day.
We've seen a sort of polarization, not just of opinions, but a polarization of the media that people use to form their opinions.
I think you have to really look at a diverse number of sources when it comes to things.
I make a point to follow a lot of different opinions on Twitter specifically.
I think it's really important to turn the channel every once in a while. No one news segment can get everything. So the more that you're able to access those news sources and news outlets, the more you're able to be informed about a particular story in a way that other people are not.
We can only interact with so many different types of people and only know about so many things happening in the world. We rely on others to do that kind of verifying and confirming of information.
I think we are in a space right now where people don't know what is true and they don't know what is fake, and everything becomes debatable. Everything becomes a source of debate. Every fact becomes a potential opinion and no resolution. I think that that's exactly where we are right now. I do think there's a way out by learning more, by trusting information, by verifying information, and by respecting other people's perspectives and knowing that they're different than fact.
Religion is a very personal experience. It is also social and highly political.
We are a public institution and a taxpayer-funded institution. Religions have a special kind of position within public institutions, and we have to keep that in mind. We've always had religious diversity on campus.
Coming from North Dakota, it's either you're Protestant or you're Catholic.
I went to a Christian school from 3rd grade through 12th grade.
One part of my identity is as a Muslim American woman.
My dad's side of the family is Catholic, and my mom's side of the family is Jewish, but I don't come from a very religious upbringing.
I am a Coptic Orthodox Christian. There's not many of us here.
Because a lot of people don't even think that the cult of spirituality is a thing, or that the cult of people are invested in our traditions or practices.
It's important that students who do profess a particular religion or religious perspective don't feel that they have to check their religion at the gate when they come onto campus. New groups are now part of the religious diversity on campus.
I struggle to find a difference and a balance between all of my identities. I do find a lot of community of students who are going through the exact same thing and who can relate on almost every level, which I have found in the Muslim Student Association.
The academic study of religion is not, as my colleagues say, not a moralizing activity. We are here to investigate religions.
I have never associated religion with my academics, just because I think it's an extremely personal journey.
All the books that I read in American Indigenous Studies are spiritual and sacred.
I appreciated the opportunity to learn about religion in the classroom just because my experience with it was not going to be the same at this level.
It's very tough to understand, what different communities of people face when you don't understand their core principles.
Students who come out of our major or minor who take religious studies classes, they they learn a language that allows them to communicate and to facilitate communication across different religious groups.
I think I want to experience, another religion like Islam, which is really one of the biggest religions in the world, through a professor, for example, who actually practices Islam and knows about the intricate details of it and who has those experiences. And a lot of students in those classes also tend to be, Muslim.
These lessons that I'm learning in class are something that I take and put into my spirituality.
And as I got older, I got a lot more comfortable in dialing in exactly what it is that I believe for myself about faith, but also like how I'm comfortable expressing that outwardly has been very beneficial because it gave me the perspective of an outsider who might be turned off by very conservative evangelical beliefs. So I think I can kind of step in and out of both of those worlds in a really productive way.
It's not diverse views that's the problem. It's not disagreement that's the problem. It's that we need to cultivate a higher tolerance for leaning into what's uncomfortable and for engagement with diverse views.
What happens when you become more religiously literate is students gain a vocabulary to talk about religion in the public sphere, to talk about religion amongst people of other religious perspectives. Religious literacy increases the ability to think about the spectrum of ideas.
Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Ho, a professor of anthropology and a member of the faculty group that's been working hard to launch the Public Life Project. I research Wall Street and the culture of finance. My current work is especially concerned with the ongoing ramifications of financialization gone wild, increased socioeconomic inequality, and racialized scapegoating. In fact, it was because of this research on the culture of financialization and inequality that I came to this Public Life Project. What I was finding was that the dominance and ubiquity of short-term financial measures and values had helped to produce socioeconomic insecurity, corporate downsizing, the dismantling of stable employment, which has led to downward mobility for many Americans. Financialized corporate restructuring really did a number on working and middle classes. It also reproduced and exacerbated the racialized wealth gap. Now, this downward mobility, at least for the Americans who are socialized into the cultural assumptions and worldviews of the American dream, who used to occupy relative privilege in part because they had been beneficiaries of governmental investments such as the GI Bill and the federal underwriting of housing mortgages, engendered a devastating crisis of expectation, which further destabilizes the very tools people counted on to make sense of the world, to delineate between fact and fiction. Oftentimes, their experiences of precarity was often harnessed by the powers that be to mobilize resentment and often misrecognize some of the key causes of their insecurity. Meanwhile, many marginalized communities, especially from Black and Indigenous communities, were never fully included in the hallmarks of the American dream. The wealth-building possibilities of the housing market, the corporate ladder. They also experienced downward mobility, but did not necessarily have the same crisis of expectation. What I began to see was that instead of coming together and creating interventions against many of these common problems of short-term financialization, the dismantling of long-term social institutions, redefining what a corporation is for, why we might need these long-term stable social institutions, this downward mobility was mobilized to foster resentment, often for those at the bottom, so to speak. So I came to this Public Life Project to help shed light on some of the key causes of socioeconomic instability, so as to counter some of the problematic fictions of resentment and scapegoating that lead to polarization. And so now I want to turn the discussion to this wonderful panel, and I'm going to move over here. So today I'm joined by a few other colleagues who are guiding the Public Life Project's rollout. We have Professor William Jones in the Department of History, Professor Jeanne Kilde in the Religious Studies program, and Professor Ben Toff in the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communication. You'll recognize them from the videos you just saw. Each of them is teaching and conducting research that intersects with the Public Life Project themes. I'd like to spend some time this evening discussing those themes and why it's important that we shine a light on this work now. Okay, so to kick off our conversation, I'd like to ask, what's your reaction to these two videos? What do you think are some of the most important points that came through? And is there anything you'd like to add or emphasize?
I can go ahead and start. Watching them back to back like that, it does make me think a lot about the ways in which, people's choices that they make around news media are not dissimilar to religious beliefs in some sense. That there's a sort of cultural side to it. People grow up with certain family practices or cultural influences that sort of shape the routines and habits that people form later in life. But ultimately, too, you're putting your trust or faith in a set of professionals to do a job to sort of determine for you what's true and what's not. Of course, one of the major differences is that journalists are dealing with facts rather than sort of cosmic questions that we can't really get answers to. And so it made me think a lot about the liberal arts as a sort of training in both of these areas for sort of learning what structures these institutions, so that students can sort of come to be better informed about the choices that they're making in their own lives.
There we go. Picking up a little bit on that, I was very interested in watching them together, which I haven't watched before. But as you see them together, the interest, the way in which they proceed from the broad public life to the media and knowledge questions, and then to the specific category of religion is really interesting. And I was, of course, pleased with that because religion is often left out of conversations, even though it's such an important part of people's identity, as many of the students demonstrated in the video, but also other broader public issues. And so as you mentioned, the way media becomes, having faith in media becomes a kind of religious activity, from a religious studies perspective, we might think about that in terms of the way that authorities are structured. Religious authorities are very important on a personal level, but then also on a broader social level. And who are the authorities that are being listened to, that are influential in the lives of students, but then in the lives of the broader community. And any public life project should be thinking about authorities in this way, I think.
I was struck by the comments, I think particularly in the first video, about students talking about the need to evaluate their sources and the degree to which being able to engage in any debate requires one to develop skills as involved in evaluating information, which in part requires the ability to gather information to find data. But it also requires the ability to evaluate the validity of that data, the utility of that data, and to engage in a coherent conversation about the information, with, I think, empathy for the people that you're engaging with and understanding sort of differing views. So, I think that's a really central skill of being able to, not just to find lots of sources of information, but to actually evaluate it and use it in a public conversation.
Okay, that was great, folks. So one of the key questions that I wanted to ask you all, and especially as faculty, in liberal arts and also at the University of Minnesota, many of these themes sort of intersect with and your own teaching and your own research. So I'd like to hear some of the insights that many of the audience could glean from your particular research projects or your teaching to shed light on some of these core sort of themes of polarization, et cetera, in the Public Life Project.
Sure, I'll start again. This is one of the major projects that I'm working on these days involves studying trusted news across multiple countries and media environments. So the US, the UK, India, Brazil, where you have all these different new digital technologies being used, you have different political systems, and trying to make sense of how people in those environments are coming to their own decisions about what they trust and what they don't trust. And a lot of what we're finding is, although there is a sort of strong vocal contingent of people who have are very distrusting of particular sources of news, there's a lot of people who are sort of untrusting because they just don't know what to trust. They're sort of disconnected from the practices of journalism. There are, many, many more authorities of information on, that they're encountering in daily life, and they're often sort of struggling to make sense of it. And I do think that, one of the things that, being part of this project has sort of reinforced is the importance of that kind of training around literacy with all of that people are being exposed to on a sort of regular basis these days.
I guess as a historian, I'm often struck by how much of the sort of public debate engages in history around sort of historical events or historical figures, and I think that's an opportunity to sort of engage on a very broad level with historical narratives and historical research. But I think it's in my teaching. I think one of the things that I try to engage students in and to encourage is, on one hand, part of I think studying history is knowing facts about history, right? And these are, the facts are the subject of intense public debate. What were the causes of the Civil War? What were the goals of the Civil Rights Movement? Or things that come up in my classes. But going beyond that, it's also important to know, to understand how can we engage historical sources to understand the answers to those questions. What do the sources tell us? And then again, how do we take these sources and engage them into constructing a historical narrative, which is, in a lot of senses, is the way in which we engage political debate, around what actually happened, what is the truth of our history, and so being able to engage that in a methodical process, I think, is a particularly important skill.
From the standpoint of religious studies and my teaching and research, there's the sort of micro level, and we kind of see the micro level of religion here in the last video, that focuses on questions of identity. The students and their religious identities or non-religious identities become important, particularly in classroom conversations. So there's that micro level, but then, and on that level, my courses will focus on questions of, well, what do we know about other individual traditions, the traditions of people in class? What do we know about their activities? What do we know about insiders and outsiders to those traditions? The diversity within the traditions. So that's a kind of micro level that we study. But then also, we think about a macro level in terms of the study of religion. And that might raise questions about
how we study religion, what kinds of questions we are bringing to it, and how those questions have changed over time. Are we looking at religion as something that's psychological? Are we looking at it as something that's social or anthropological? So we approach it in very interdisciplinary ways from different disciplines. Specifically then, in terms of my own work, I've been involved in a faculty and graduate student collaborative group for the past several years, looking at religion at public universities, because there is that question about the role of religion within a state-sponsored institution, that church-state question. How does the teaching of religion, or how do activities around religion, how are those played out on university campuses right now? So that's one of the major things I've been looking at: First Amendment rights, freedom of religion questions, establishment of religion, and so forth. So those types of macro questions are also things that I've been looking at, and others of our faculty have. Sort of in that category, I would add one more point about the way in which those macro questions involve the role of religion in political life in America. The culture wars, we have a wonderful class on the culture wars. The role of religion in media, as we've brought up here. So there's from the macro to the micro, there's just so many levels in which research and teaching here at the university are addressing religion.
That was great. So one of my questions that dovetails from many of your responses is that, one of the ways to perhaps understand or counter polarization is to really have a shared set of social facts, right? And I think what sort of I'm sensing from many of you is that your research really engages this question of how do we think about the production of social facts? What Hannah Arendt would say, sort of factual truths. And to further sort of draw from Hannah Arendt, who's a philosopher, she writes that, what happens to the larger social fabric if greater sort of members of the public begin to believe that Belgium invaded Germany, or Czechoslovakia invaded Germany, and not the other way around, right? If that belief sort of holds as a problematic fact, then all other aspects of the social fabric then need to be oriented to that problematic belief. And so it reorients the very fabric of our ability to come together as a society. So in terms of, not that we all need to respond to Hannah Arendt, but what are some of your thoughts that you all have about how to continue to sort of engage and produce robust social facts and teach them in a ways that we have a shared understanding of some of the major problems that face us?
So this is something that I think I've actually witnessed in the time that I've been teaching at the university level, the past 20 years or so. I think an erosion of students, a decline in students' sort of faith in their ability to gain facts, to sort of, and it's a sort of, I think, a rising cynicism that, I think we've seen in the society as a whole, this sort of, in part, this sort of, an assault on the idea that there are these truths. And on one hand, I think that's a really healthy response, right? I mean, I think on one thing that I think a lot of us are trying to teach is a skepticism toward these sort of established truths, and but the flip side of that can be the sense that you can never believe in anything, right? There's no truth. And I think perhaps at the core of a liberal arts education is the ability to actually establish some, maybe truth is too strong a word, but some facts that we have a pretty good sense of them being based upon our own ability to evaluate sources and to do the research, right? And then use those facts to engage in a productive conversation. And I think that's a really difficult sort of line in the middle to draw. But the skepticism, I think, is healthy. But there's often, I think, a tendency to say, well, we can't know anything really, and you just pick and choose your facts as you want.
Yeah, it's interesting as both of you were, as each of you were talking about how this plays out in your teaching. I noticed a sort of common theme that's come up is often around teaching of skills and methodology around approaching a particular subject matter. And I think that's a really core element of not only the liberal arts, but about this problem of how to evaluate what seems like, endless different versions of reality, is sort of having a better understanding of what's the basis of those claims, those assertions that are being made, what's the sort of ground truth of what they're drawing on. And in many cases, there are different perspectives. We won't always arrive at the truth, but at least having a set of skills for interrogating where people are coming from and being able to listen to those perspectives in a sort of more rigorous way, I think is the only way to sort of arrive at some sort of progress on that.
Absolutely, I definitely agree that having those skills to evaluate the authorities, but then also and I think this is where liberal arts education really excels, also to understand that there's different types of knowledge. There are different types of knowledges, and they need to be understood as different. The authorities for different types of knowledges are different, are varied as well, are diverse as well. So thinking about my area of religion from different disciplines, and beginning from art history, for instance, from the creative arts, from music, from history, from anthropology, sociology, and I'm missing one. Political science, whatever. She says the historian, not the social scientist. But understanding that people approach what the facts are from very different perspectives, and thus there may not be agreement on what the facts are. So what knowledges are, and I think a liberal arts education gives students the ability to sort through that and deal with the messiness and not be afraid of it.
That's great. From an anthropological perspective, I would say that on the one hand, we really want to teach our students the importance of perspectives, right? The importance of situated knowledges. And at the same time, we have to really pay attention to the ways in which knowledge and discourse and materiality can help to produce particular worlds that are very real, and that we can come to sort of an understanding of some of the shared knowledges of what some of those social facts are. Well, I hate to cut myself short, but I think we're running out of time, and I hate to cut the panel short. This was wonderful. But I want to make sure that we make time for some audience questions. And now I'll turn it back to Doug.
Thanks, Karen. So we'd now like to hear from our audience. Let us know your thoughts, reflections, and questions. We've actually had a few come in. I'll get to those shortly. All panelists are going to be available to respond to questions. Throughout the event, in fact, the questions we've been getting, we've assembled those. I'll try to put them together and have a conversation about those. As a reminder, there's a button located at the bottom of your screen if you want to add to the questions or to the discussion. Now, I'll start with a question. Now, I've got to find it here if I can do the technology dance. From someone out there named Mike. It's a little bit long, but I think it's important to let Mike's question be heard here. I love what I'm seeing so far, and I'm grateful for everyone's efforts to start this project. That said, I feel like in the context of polarization, there's an elephant in the room. The audience and participants here are probably mostly college graduates or students and are involved in or engaged with a major university in a big metropolitan area. But some of the most significant examples of polarization, and the ones that I would argue are undergirding our current political polarization, are those of the educated versus the uneducated, urban versus rural, intellectually engaged versus those skeptical of intellectualism and academic people. With that in mind, how might this project involve or engage with these other factions of our society who wouldn't necessarily find or gravitate toward a project like this one, and the very strong beliefs and political opinions that they hold? That's a big one. Who wants to go first?
Can I try?
Absolutely.
So one of the things that does dismay me about the intellectual class that we are part of is what I would call an utter lack of self-reflection. So we used to be more trusted, and we're much less trusted now. And the answer is not, gosh, these people used to trust us, they don't now. What have we done? Most of the time it's, why aren't those idiots listening to us? And it's not healthy for us. So yeah, I kind of agree with a lot of the less educated people's distrust. People don't tend to trust people who don't like them.
Thanks. Our project is a really difficult line to find between students and faculty from a variety of backgrounds who feel marginalized and polarized from many different directions. I wonder if others have thoughts on the question as posed from our audience. I see thoughts. I'm hoping somebody might offer some words.
I think to go back to Professor Kilde's point of validating the idea that there is also other types of knowledge, that at least helps me to recontextualize the goal of the project and trying to navigate diversity across even the spaces where barriers have impacted the ability for certain groups of people to have the same advantages as others. And yeah, that is a tough one. But I will say it starts with intent and personal responsibility, even regardless of different positionalities and statuses that are held. The desire needs to be there first in order to have any type of connection at all. And from there, that's when I think the magic happens.
We could probably spend all night on this one, but let's take a couple more thoughts if we have them. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a really quick one. I mean, it was a really great question. I'd like to also sort of add that we really also want to problematize the kinds of binaries or dichotomies or nesting, right, that is really sort of implicit in many of our answers and in some of the questions. So for example, does intellectualism map onto a particular kind of education, map onto rural and urban, map onto, X and Y, and maybe not. Right? And part of it is to really sort of trouble some of these assumptions and these sort of isomorphic nesting, so to speak, where one is conflated with the other, right? And a lot of heterogeneity is reduced and flattened into one part of the group versus another, as if there are only two sides and they all had to be neatly combined into a particular nest.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on that because I think, one particular sort of nesting that was inherent to the question was the sort of urban-rural, educated, uneducated, which, the fact is that we live in a society in which the majority do not attend college, and that's true of urban areas and rural areas. So we live in a major urban area in which most people have not attended college. And I think actually, I think this is a university that is actually very engaged with beyond the university walls. In my own work is very engaged in the city, in the urban community around us. That again is not particularly engaged with people who are university educated. It's engaged with people who are educated in different institutions and in different ways. And so I think there's a lot of resources that are connected to a university like this that allow us to engage exactly across those boundaries with different forms of knowledge and different educational institutions that people engage with. So.
Professor Jones, this wasn't directed toward you, but it came as you're talking, and I've heard you lecture on this before. The question is, are we really more divided now than we've ever been before?
I guess I think that we have, I mean, this is clearly a nation and a world that has been divided as long as we've been talking. And, you know, I think that in many ways, I think the sort of focus on division and polarization is actually a result of more engagement across differences in which the conversation had previously just not taken place. I think, you know, our electorate has become more diverse racially and internationally over the past several decades in ways that have put people in conversation in ways that they have not been before. So the conversation may have become more polarized. I think in many ways the society has always been deeply divided and polarized.
Just so everybody knows, I put Will on the spot there because he was in at least one or two of the conversations we had backstage faculty-wise in the ramp-up for this that talked about, are we more polarized or not? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because I think sometimes we assume it's a negative, and there's also possibilities for change that might come out of that. I've got several different questions here. I mean, it's careful what you ask for when you ask for questions from a liberal arts crowd. There's a lot coming in. But a set of them, mostly for faculty, I think about how do you engage debate in classrooms? And there's kind of a kicker that somebody added is, do you tolerate everyone? Yeah, Braden, I think you should give the mic to somebody else on that one.
Well, I just happened to be sitting next to him. That's not fair. On encouraging debate, I really think that philosophy, at least the kind of philosophy that I do and was trained in, is very much a debate-oriented kind of discipline. So if you read academic papers in philosophy, it's, you know, I say this, and an opponent might challenge me in this way. We write our own debates without even any interlocutor. So I have to get students to do that. In a way, I'm sort of, I don't know, lucky or cowardly that I don't teach political philosophy, and I mean, there are other people who could do it better than I do. That's why I don't do it. So a lot of the topics that I'm talking about are not the topics that are currently the hottest for political polarization. But I guess what I try to do with students, and right now with the pandemic, it's that adds a whole different layer of difficulty to getting them to do that. But I try to make them understand that the point of critical discussion, where you raise an objection to what somebody else had said, is not to be a jerk, not to attack the other person, but to try to make the original ideas stronger. So you're looking for the weakest point of a position or an argument, and that's going to help you build it up so that it can withstand more scrutiny. That is the Socratic method, and I think maybe students, because philosophy is kind of weird and different. They haven't done philosophy before. They don't teach it in high schools in the US. So I think the fact that they are a little bit disoriented as it is, and they can see that method being duplicated or, you know, modeled by me and by the papers that they're reading, I think they get the idea that, okay, that's what we're doing here. That there is a bit of a challenge in getting them. It's funny because when I used to teach in other places, the challenge was getting them to be nice to each other, and in Minnesota, the challenge is getting them to be critical of each other. So I don't know if other people have that experience, but so the modeling and setting it up as a disciplinary approach, I think those are two of the things that I do.
Could somebody pass the mic to Professor Phelan? There's a version of this question that came in specifically for you, Chris. It says, you mentioned it's very unhealthy to be fearful of controversial topics. And the questioner goes on to say, I think people do consume things in news bites. As you say, I see two problems. One is that people are overly antagonistic to ideas that don't fit their worldview. The other is that nobody seems to have the patience to engage in real conversation with others. How do you think we can make progress on this situation?
One person at a time, when that person is yourself. So again, I would ask, this is somewhat my last comment, which is, if you want people you're talking with to be able, to be willing to do something, model it yourself. So don't go through life saying, I just wish everybody would listen to me more. That's their problem.
Professor Toff, I see you've got a microphone.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this. One of the things I think our digital media environment in particular tends to accentuate is this impression that everybody has an opinion about everything, and creates a platform for people to express those opinions. And there are many ways in which that is a great thing, especially when you consider the many, many years in which a lot of people didn't have a voice. But it I think can lead, I notice this in the classroom where students are often, they don't necessarily know what they think about every issue, and they're still coming to figure that out. And so creating a space for people to have an actual conversation where they're not feeling pressured to take a stand that they maybe haven't fully thought out, I think that's part of the process of education. I think, and that extends well beyond just a college campus. I think many of us are still figuring out what we think about really complicated things in the world, and so creating, allowing a space for people to be unsure about what they think, I think is maybe the first step.
I just want the audience to know, I see the questions coming in about how we can do more of this in the world around us. I'm not sure we'll get to all of those tonight. It is why we're trying to have these events, to start to think about those things. Somebody pushed still on the tolerance point of everyone. I don't know if anybody wants to deal with that. I did want to add another angle that's come in. One questioner asked or said they found it surprising that COVID has been so polarizing. How do we explain that, and how do we engage that from the point of view of what we do in the liberal arts?
Just quickly, one thing we don't tolerate is students without masks. I mean, that's actually, tying it into the tolerance point, I don't think you can tolerate everything as an instructor at this university or really any university. I think it's our ethical responsibility to make sure that we have an environment where all students can learn. And I think that means there are certain things that can't be tolerated that are really hateful and ugly. That's my view about it anyway.
Karen?
Yeah, if I can just add to that, Valerie. Right, so if we are engaging in debate in the classroom, it's not that we are sort of fostering, what's the debate pro-enslavement and against enslavement, right? That's not a debate we're going to tolerate. Obviously, it would be against enslavement. But in terms of what the question about tolerance and about sort of what we sort of add when we teach, as an anthropologist, I think that sort of a key part of my job is to really sort of intervene against the soundbite, right? And part of that soundbite is sort of creating a sort of an attention to history, to culture, to power, to our global interconnection, right? To the larger context. And that directly counters not only sort of the viral soundbite, but the sort of knowledge that only sort of reflects on to people's epistemological silos or what somebody's uncle said, right? To the extent that we refocus on sort of history, knowledge, power, culture, et cetera, that provides a larger context that shapes many of our larger issues and debates. That then grounds and allows us to create a shared conversation.
That so reminds me of student evaluation at the end of a semester. We were in a course I was teaching on religion in America, and a student said that it was such a pleasure for her to be in a class where she could discuss religion without it having to be a debate. And so it is that contextualizing that's so key, that allows students to explore different ideas, different perspectives. As you say, a lot of students don't know what they think about issues and so forth. So providing that an opportunity and a safe space to discuss context is important.
A little bit of a generic question. People are wanting to know, what are the classrooms like coming back after the pandemic? Anybody got any experiences to share on that? Whether it's about polarization and division or more generally, how's it been?
Well, I've felt a sense of sort of relief being back in the classroom, and I think most students feel that as well. I think things aren't totally normal, right? I mean, we're all wearing masks, and I teach in classrooms with air filters that make a lot of noise, and there's a lot of challenges to teaching in this environment. I think people are still very nervous to be in public, and that's a challenge. But I think for myself anyway, I've felt it's really wonderful to be back in the classroom, and I've really missed that interaction. That there's interaction over Zoom, but it's a very different type of interaction. So. Anyone else? So I have another question here. In response to a letter I wrote to the school board, or a school board recently, in my city, someone said to me, the value of knowledge is going towards zero because of our artificial intelligence. What do the panelists think about that? Artificial intelligence.
I personally think the value of knowledge is going to remain at zero until it's applied. And an application of knowledge, even if it's AI, would still be an example of how we can further ourselves and further our communities. That's just an initial thought, though.
Appreciate you tackled that one, Braden. That was pretty good. I wonder if maybe as we're starting to wrap up, we might try to address this kind of set of questions I've got that I think I'll summarize with the way John put it at the end of his. How do you propose we can bring these learnings and teachings and lessons to the broader community regarding our civic organizations? I think people are seeing a lot in what we're doing on campus, the teaching we're doing, the research we're doing, how we work with students, how our students are engaging things, but what are some of those larger lessons and skills maybe that we've talked about, and how do we bring them outside of the academy?
As a sociologist, Doug, I bet you have thoughts on this question.
Yeah, I wish I was sitting out there, I guess. I mean, a simple thing is what we're trying to do here. And I guess I'd also say, I think we have a lot of our colleagues that are doing research outside of the world that's about that world and trying to dig into facts about the world and the people around us, even ourselves, that help inform us. For me, I think the challenge is using some of the media that we're critical of, exactly to bring forward not only the knowledge and information, but the skills, the capacities, the abilities to evaluate, to persuade. But I'm supposed to just be asking the questions, so I wonder if maybe some of you want to jump in.
I'll just say one thought on this, that thinking back on the earlier question as well about some of the education divides, rural-urban divides, and the feeling that, which I think is, not totally incorrect, which is that a lot of what we do as faculty involves sort of the life of the mind and this sense that maybe it doesn't have a connection to people's day-to-day lives if they're not part of a university community. And that's, I personally don't think that's true, but I think it's on us to really make that case to people who aren't part of these communities. And so I think we can do that in our own research, where we're actually going into these parts of outside of the Twin Cities and conversing one-on-one with people about whether, it's our own research that involves, taking seriously their forms of knowledge and their perspectives, or what it is that they do in their work. And I think there's a lot of research that goes on at this university that actually does do that, but I think it's hard for people to necessarily know that unless we as a university actually sort of communicate that effectively.
Just to sort of, highlight one of the research and community engagement of one of my colleagues, Catherine Hayes, who works on sort of an archaeology of Fort Snelling and tells a counter-narrative of the dominant mainstream narrative, working with Dakota peoples and descendant communities, right, to redo, in a sense, the sort of dominant narratives of what Fort Snelling has meant, and it's sort of its iconic sort of place in Dakota histories and contemporary world. So, there's a lot of research in the College of Liberal Arts that actually engages deeply with communities.
I wonder if that reminder of the land that we live on and who's been here before us and where we are today might be a right place to end. I want to thank our panelists for joining us today and celebrating the launch of the Public Life Project. Thanks also to everyone joining us online for taking the time this evening to learn more about the initiative and to participate in the conversation by putting such awesome questions in front of us. This event has been brought to you by the College of Liberal Arts, where we are reimagining the 21st century liberal arts experience. As a diverse, energetic community of students, faculty, staff, alumni, and donors, we seek to make a difference here on campus, at home, and throughout the world. More information about the Public Life Project, including a recording of tonight's event, can be found on the College of Liberal Arts website. I hope you'll also consider joining us on October 28th, where we have an event that's called Journalism, Public Power, and Public Trust. That's a conversation with CNN's Abby Phillip. Until then, stay well and have a wonderful evening.